All right, hello and good day to everyone. Welcome to this edition of our Friday Fundamentals. My name is Steve, so thank you for joining me today. Today I'm going to be going over our SoftView estimating, showing you how to make a simple modification to a generated report through to customizing the default materials and how they calculate their quantities. But the second half of this lesson, we're going to be concentrating on the decking materials. I'm going to use the decking materials to demonstrate how accurate the material list can become. As always, this session will be recorded and posted to our social media pages so you can review its content at a later time. To begin, I have a sample project here on my screen. It's a simple bungalow home. There's a full basement with the design as well. And yes, there's a deck towards the back. To generate a material report, as you would generate a section elevation or a 3D, you first need to make sure that whatever drawings you intend to view in the material report are assembled under the model. So here on the left-hand side in the navigation, you want to make sure that each drawing you are intended to get a material report from is included in the model. And as it is with 3D elevation and section, the order of which they are assembled, it can also play a part. So make sure they're ordered appropriately, basement on the bottom, main floor at the top in our case. To generate a report, there's a couple of ways. From the model menu at the top, material list is one way, but it's a little bit more convenient just to rely on the navigation here on the left side. There are a number of reports. I'm going to start off with generating a standard complete. This is what most people start off with. So double clicking on that produces my report. The accuracy of this report is tied closely, obviously, to the accuracy of your floor plans. So if I were to come back to my floor plan, for example, you want to make sure that here in your mode selector, in your toolbar, you want to go through all the modes of the drawing, area mode, ceiling, electrical, floor system, roof, etc., to make sure that all those components for the complete building structure are added. Again, anything missing from the drawing is going to be missing from your material report. So I've generated here a standard complete. This will give us a complete listing of all the objects drawn in the floor plans. Kind of tied with the standard report, we also have a by floor, and as the name implies, if I generate it here, it will tell me how much materials are on the first floor, in this case basement, and how many materials are on the second floor, or in this case the main floor. If we did have a two-story home, the benefit there is that you'd be able to understand how much framing is in the main floor versus the second floor. So you could perhaps order the materials based on the floor of which it's going to be used with. The summary report, if I generate it, it gives us the same quantities and total cost, but the individual details of each material is a little less. So the number of columns produced does not give us all that detail as, for example, the complete report does. So if I quickly bring that back to the forefront, the complete report gives us a cost markup, material cost, labor unit, labor markup, kind of breaks down each material into very specific costings. The summary report just gives us a summary for the total cost. However, in each case, towards the very bottom, if I scroll to the bottom, it's going to give us the same total quantity, just over 7,000. Same price value there. Just the standard report, or sorry, the standard complete report is breaking each cost material down a little bit finer. I'm going to close the summary, just a right click and close, and do the same with the by floor. Again, when we talk about SoftList, the accuracy of the report is as accurate as the information put into the drawings. One of the other reports that we can generate here on the left-hand side is the trade contractors report. If I generate it, one of the benefits with the trade contractors is it will post some warnings if certain elements that the program expects are missing. And in this case, it says there's no ceiling insulation. So without any ceiling insulation drawn, there's no quantity of ceiling insulation produced. So if I come back to my floor plan, this is the importance of making sure you go through all your modes and add all the information necessary from each mode. In the case of ceiling insulation, I can do a manual trace. That's a garage in the lower left. So I'll skip it. And I now have ceiling insulation. The trade contractors report will refresh, knowing that I have that now included, is no longer warning me of that mistake. The first display there too is also about the foundation types. The program does its best guess as to determine if you got a slab on grade or a crawl space, or in this case, a full foundation or full basement, because the types of warnings that it gives you can change depending on the type of foundation. I'll close the trade contractors report. Back to the top, certain materials in here can be changed on the fly. For example, building permit is an easy example here. That may change from project to project. If I click on Edit Prompt Variables, the button here at the top, I'm left with this dialog. This allows me to change certain elements of the report for the project at hand. So in this case, it has a building permit, but if I want to change the cost, I can do so here, or if I do not need termite protection for this particular design, we'll set that to no. We can change these values, and if I hit OK, sure enough, those pieces of information are updated. Now, obviously, we see here the material cost for the building permit has changed to what I input. If I click back into that dialog, notice towards the bottom there is a prompt on report generation. I'm going to turn that on because what it does is it brings to the forefront this dialog before the report is generated, kind of as a reminder to make these changes before you go ahead and run the report. I'll turn that on and I'll close the report just to demonstrate what that really does. So I have no report generated. I'll double click on the standard complete again. And before the report shows, I'm prompted with this dialog so I can change these values and set the appropriate responses before the report is generated. So yes, I'll turn that back on. Let's hit that to a different price, hit OK. Those are the values that the program will use for that report. And that can change obviously from project to project. So it's beneficial to have that prompt appear before you to remind you to make those changes as needed. Other changes, and then that's maybe there's a find value up here. I'm going to look for shingles. There it is, if you spell it right. And it's telling me how many shingles I need, and the units are at this point bundles. Well, we can modify this report from this point of view if you decide something needs to be done a little bit differently. So let's say, for example, with asphalt shingles, we want to order the quantity and the number of squares. 1 square is 100 square feet. To do so, I can simply double click, in this case, into the quantity field. This brings up an edit of the quantity. Right now it's 48. That's 48 bundles. A bundle is what, about 33 square feet. So if you multiply 48 by 32, you get about 1,600 square feet, and that represents about, if I set it to a fixed quantity, 16 square. If I want to, I can do an adjustment of the quantity, which basically allows me to add a certain value to that calculated quantity, or I could do a multiplication of that quantity. It would multiply the calculated value by whatever value I put in there, and you will be able to put in decimal values there as well. And there's also a waste factor that we can input. So that's the calculator value, but now the displayed value is going to be whatever I punched in as the fixed quantity. I want 16. When you make such a modification, the cell of which that modification occurred in is grayed out, or not grayed out, but shown in a gray bar. I'll go through and then change the rest. This is no longer in bundles, it's in squares, so SQ for square. We can change, obviously, the cost, it's $75, and the labor to install is, let's say, 63. So any modification now is specific to the project. So if I were to close this project and bring it back up, it would recall those modifications. But if I generate a new report on a different project, it would not have those modifications. It would go back to its defaults. It would calculate the number of bundles, in this case, for shingles. As I hover over any modification, it will give you a little tooltip indicating what that unmodified value is. And if you want to, for example, remove a material, let's say we don't need asphalt shingles, we can right click, there'll be an option to remove that line. That line is gone, and the totals that it was attributing to the total cost is also removed. If there's a material missing, we can right click and add a line. It adds a line beneath, and we could fill in the missing information. Roofing nails, for example. Say how many you need. We need 10 pounds. So we have to do a fixed quantity here. Units, and then you fill out the cost, etc., to create that line. If you want to remove it, right click, remove line. If you wanted to see any lines that you manually removed, towards the top here we have show removed lines. So if I click on that, it will show the ridge shingles that I removed. They're in an overstrike mode. I see it, but the totals are not attributing to the total cost. If I wanted to put that line back in, once it's shown, right click, re-add line. Puts it back in, and the $150 is now added to the total. And if I want to remove all modifications from this generated report, that's what the button up here does. So I can do so, and any modifications I put in are removed. So that's how we can modify our report basically on the fly. However, if you want to specify asphalt shingles in a different unit of measurement, it's probably a good idea to change how the defaults are set up. So that's what we're going to take a look at next. I'm going to just clear my search. That's what the highlights were. I'll right click on asphalt shingles and select Edit Material. From here, we can see a material setup dialog. This indicates how that material is being estimated. First thing to take note of is the material group towards the top. SoftList organizes every object that you draw in a floor plan into a logical group. So roofs belong to their own group, walls are another group, windows and doors, for example, belong to a group called openings. Once a group has been established for a material, the layout of the material setup dialog reflects the group chosen. So in this case, roof component, only calculate material if roof has the gutter, plumber, rake, soffit, or the roofing materials. Those are choices that are only available to roofs. It wouldn't make sense to have those same choices for a wall, for example. They would have their own choices. So the group chosen here dictates the look of this material setup dialog. In the middle right here, there's a calculation method. And yeah, there are 4 choices there, but in reality, there are 2 ways a material gets added to a generated report. It's either through a list format or a lumber format. If it's a piece of lumber, you go to a lumber format. That means that it goes to another part of the program called a lumber pricing table to determine the price of the size of lumber found in the project. And if it's not a piece of lumber, we add it to the report through the list format. This being shingles, not a piece of lumber, it's in a list format. Bottom left is the calculation of its quantity, how much you need of that material. The program uses what are called variables, and a variable is a known property of the group chosen. So in this case, if the program discovers that we need roof shingles because the roof material on the roof is asphalt shingles, that's what's selected here. If that is true, it takes note of the roof material area, so the area of the roof, and because the original unit of measurement was bundles, one bundle consists of 32 square feet. So the coverage of one bundle is 32 square feet. It's probably important to note that all of the variables that the program uses, their unit of measurement is in feet. So this roof material area is in square feet. So if we want to modify this material setup to permanently give us the number of squares, we'll first come up here to the units and change our units to squares. Square being a unit that is not yet in use by the program. If we want to invent a new unit of measurement, we just click on that blank space at the beginning and type in the new unit of measurement, SQ for square. That unit of measurement now gets added to the list so you can pick it for another material if you needed to. So we've just changed the unit of measurements, but that does not change how the material is calculated. It's still taking the area of the roof and giving it a coverage of 32 square feet. We'll change the coverage here to 100 because 1 square covers 100 square feet. I'll then come to the accounting button, which brings up another little dialog, giving me that tracking information for material price and labor. So we'll set cost to 74 and $63 for the labor to install. So hit OK. Hit OK again, save my changes, and the program will now recalculate that to give me what I really needed, 16 square, $74 per square. That's a permanent change. So yes, if I now generated a report on another project, it will also calculate in that unit of measurement with the appropriate price and labor cost. Let's find next example called siding. We'll do the same thing. We want siding perhaps also in the number of squares. If I right-click on siding and go to Edit Material, this one looks a little odd. First of all, we've just discussed what a group is. A group is how the program organizes the objects drawn. And one of the examples I gave, well, walls belong to their own group. Well, siding is on walls, but taking note here, it's in group something called per floor. Group per floor is a special group. And what the group per floor requires is just a drawing. It doesn't matter what is drawn in that drawing, as long as you have a drawing assembled, then the formula has been satisfied. But if you take a look at how much we want, it's 0. What we're looking at here is a clue to understand that this material, siding, is an accumulation of materials from other sources. I'm going to hit cancel and further demonstrate that. At the top of my menu, I have a materials button. So if I select that, it brings up the list of all the predefined materials that the standard report has been shipped with. Again, there's another find here. I'll find siding. And if I scroll down, there are 4 materials here for siding. There's siding in the gables, siding in the walls, and siding in walls with the profile. Taking a look at the calculation method, so there's a column here when we're looking at this that dictates the calculation method. I'm going to first, with siding on the gables, edit it, and we bring up to the same material setup dialog that we saw with the asphalt shingles. This is just a different way of getting to the same location. And this belongs to group roof. So yes, when we draw a roof, we can have a gable end and we can specify the material on the gable end. And if that material happens to be siding, we want to take its quantity and add it to the area of siding that's on the walls, if there is siding on the walls, which is what the next formula does, siding walls. A material setup can only look at one group at a time. And if the same material is used in different areas of the building, in this case, siding on the gable, which is a roof, and siding on the walls, which is walls, we could create separate formulas to list each one individually, but then accumulate them together. And you take a look at the calculation method, that's what the accumulate does. When we set to accumulate, the add to material is available, telling us or asking us what material its quantity is going to be added to. So if we want to change the unit of measurement in an accumulated material, we need to specify the coverage in each of the material that calculates the quantity. Notice the units are null and void when it's set to an accumulate. That unit now is controlled, in this case, by the siding material. So in siding gables, we'll set the coverage, so the area of the gable end panel, if it has one of these siding materials. If we divide the coverage or add a coverage of 100, we'll get the number of squares for that. I'll click on this next button, which if I save my changes, it just brings up the next material in the list, which is siding for the walls. And I'll do the same thing. It's 100 for the coverage. Again, it's added to material siding. This belongs to here group walls, as we can see, so siding on the walls. If I hit next, this one is a little unique because you can define a wall that has a profile. And if you've done so, there's a trick or a trigger here to take note of a wall with a profile. And if you have, we also want to know the area of it. But we want to give it the same unit of measurement, coverage of 100. I'll click on next once more, save my changes. This is the material that we looked at earlier. This is the one group per floor. So the three materials preceding it are taking their totals and adding it to the total of the siding material. The siding material starts at 0, so before we estimate how much siding is in a home, we assume there's none, and if it finds any on the gable and any on the walls or profiled walls, it adds those to the total of the siding. So 0 plus whatever's in the gable or whatever's in the wall gives us a grand total. We don't need to add the coverage here. That's not in itself adding anything. 0 divided by 100 is still 0, but we want to make sure that the unit of measurement reflects the unit that the other materials are set to, square. I'll then come to accounting, change this pricing accordingly, so also the accumulated material controls the price information. I'll hit OK, save all my changes, hit OK down here, and the program will regenerate now with a new unit of measurement for siding. Again, that was a little different because it was an accumulated material based off of the different groups that siding belongs to. In the main 3D view, what we want to do next is with the siding material, right now the program has only one siding material to list, but we want to kind of separate that. We want to have a vertical siding versus a horizontal siding. So first thing we need to do is create a wall that has vertical siding. I'm going to edit the front garage wall. From the dialog, I'm going to hit the definition button, which brings up how that wall is defined. And right now the siding in all the walls that have siding in it, we assign siding A to those walls. I'm going to make a copy of this wall through Save As, give the name vertical siding, vert for short, and hit OK. And I'm just going to change the siding material from A to B. I'll hit OK. That saves that wall definition. And I'm now going to change the wall, the front of the garage wall, to that new definition, vertical siding. The alignment is going to be the same, outside to outside, that's fine. And now I get a different siding in the face of my garage. Now it doesn't look like vertical siding. That's our next task. So in a 3D point of view, we want to make siding B look like vertical siding. To do that, I also want to have that same blue tone as the horizontal siding. So I'm going to use the copy paste surface, click on the blue siding, and then click on the tan siding, and it matches that siding. I'll then do a surface edit, and from the options, I'm just going to rotate it. Now it's vertical. So from our point of view, that looks like a vertical siding in a 3D. Hit OK. I'm also going to edit the gable ends. Sorry, this is with an item edit. So an item edit on the gable end. By default, the material of the wall below is the same material that's going to be assigned to the gable end. In this case, I want vertical siding in my gable end. So if I edit my gable edge, I can specify the material to be not A, but siding B, and it will be vertical there as well. I'll wheel around to the opposite side. There's another gable there. I'll edit that gable in the same fashion and make it siding B. So I've just created, from a 3D point of view, siding B as a vertical siding. However, from my material list point of view, if I bring to the forefront the report again, no change has occurred with the amount of siding. So our next task then is to break apart the siding into both horizontal and vertical siding. To do so, I'm going to come up to Materials. I'll find Siding. And what I'm going to do is make a copy of those 4 materials and modify the copies to suit. To copy a material, in this case I have siding gable selected, I'll hit the copy button. There'll be a little note here, select in location to insert. I'm going to then insert it after the total siding. I'll then copy this one. Copy the profiled walls. And finally copy the total or the accumulated material. So we're in the same order: siding gable, siding walls, siding profile walls, and siding. I'm going to go back to the original siding gables. I'm going to quickly put in a horizontal, so I recognize this as horizontal. And I'm going to change the selection of the wall materials, basically remove siding B from it. I'll hit next, save my changes. And in the wall material here, for walls on the siding, again, rename it and remove siding B from the selected materials. One more next. Rename it and remove siding B. I'll do next again and rename this one to horizontal siding. So nothing else changes there. So at this point, it's eliminating siding B from the horizontal siding calculation. We do the opposite then with the siding, or the second copies of those. First of all, I'm going to come to this one and rename it, short form. I'll hit previous in this case. Rename it and eliminate everything except siding B. Everything else remains the same except the add to material. It's no longer going to the horizontal siding. That's what the original formula did before I copied it. Instead, I want to go to the vertical siding. So the vertical siding on the profiled walls will add its total to the vertical siding material. I'll hit previous and save my changes. Make the same modification, only look at siding B, and accumulate it to the vertical siding rather than horizontal, and do the same for the gables. Add it to vertical. I'll hit OK and save my changes, and hit OK once again down here. It's eliminated siding B from its calculation, so I have less than 12. Now it's 9 squares. However, how much vertical siding it's not listing anywhere. Down here in my report output, it's telling me why. This is because that the new material, vertical siding, is not in the layout. If I double click into that error message, it's going to open up the layout portion of the program. You'll see at the top it's now highlighted as the layout. The layout, what it does is control the order of materials that are in the report. So since vertical siding is a new material, the program needs to know where that's going to list. That's the job of the layout. I'm going to search for siding. So there's the original horizontal siding that I renamed. To add vertical siding to the same location, it's a drag drop. So I'm just going to drag this material and drop it below the horizontal siding. Take note that when it's included in the layout currently, it's in a gray tone, and if it's not in the layout, it'd be in a bold text. So now that I've added vertical siding to the same location as horizontal siding, I'll hit OK. Report regenerates, and now it gives me how much squares for the vertical siding versus the horizontal siding. Next thing we'll take a look at is the decking materials. First of all is the ring joist. The ring joists are currently laid out by a lineal length. So it's a 2x10 and I need 63 lineal feet of it. I prefer to give specific lengths for my deck ring joists. Well, if we take a look at how the deck is drawn, if I bring up my main floor plan, that switches back to drawing mode, the deck ring joists, or the perimeter joists, obviously are on the deck edges. And the length of the ring joist is equal to the length of the edge of the deck you drew. So I have a nearly 20 foot left to right and 12 feet up and down. I'd prefer the program to list me a 12-foot piece of lumber for the left and right sides. And since the top is fairly long, I can break that down into, let's say, 2 equal 10-foot lengths. I'm going to pop up a little document here. And what I've done here is create certain rules as to how I want the program to estimate ring joists for the deck. The lengths of which I want to order my ring joists are from 8 to 16 feet. I don't want anything longer than 16 feet. And then the rules are as follows. If I draw a deck edge that is less than or equal to 6 feet, cut that length from a 12-foot piece of lumber. If the edge of the deck is between 6 and 16, order in the next 2-foot increments. So a 12-foot length of deck edge would give me a 12-foot deck ring joist. And then we get a little fancy with it. If we want if we draw a deck edge between 16 and 18, we want one 8-foot length and one 10-foot length. Or if it's between 18 and 20, which is what ours is, we want two 10-foot lengths. And if we draw anything longer than 20, we'll just break it down into 12-foot lengths, how many 12-foot lengths we need to make up that full length. So with those rules in mind, we're going to modify the deck ring joist formula to follow those same rules. right-click, edit material. The deck ring joist is a piece of lumber, so it's in a lumber format. And when it is in a lumber format, we can specify either a single piece or a lineal length. Currently is set to a lineal length. That's what we need. But in order for us to give us the appropriate individual pieces, yes, I can select single piece, but at that point it will say that, well, my 20-foot piece of lumber requires a 20-foot deck edge requires a 20-foot long piece of lumber. I want to avoid that. So what we can do over here under the calculation method is something called a custom formula. A custom formula allows me to be very specific as to how something is going to be estimated. And we're going to use what I call a series of cascading if, else, and if statements. The if, else, and if statement is basically a condition. As long as that condition is true, then it will create and order you the appropriate piece of lumber in this case. There's already a condition established if the length of the lumber is greater than or equal to the minimum lumber length. The minimum lumber length is a variable that can be modified. Currently it's set to 12 inches. So what that means is that if there's a lumber that's less than 12 inches, or a deck edge in this case less than 12 inches long, the program will not order any material for it. We'll assume that if you do have a deck edge that's 12 inches or less, you'll get a piece of lumber from the scrap pile to put it in place. So we'll leave that condition alone. And instead we want to start our new conditions. To do so, I'm going to hit enter at the end of the first line and start off with my new condition, which is if length is less than or equal to 6 feet. That's my first condition. If that is true, the set dimensions here, if you're worried, allows a piece of lumber to display appropriately. So here it's a 2-inch by 10-inch. That's why it's listing as inches, inches, feet, inches. If this was a 12-inch piece of lumber, rather than have it list as a 2 by 1 foot, we want it to list as a 2 by 12-inch. That's what the set dimensions controls. So we'll keep that in there. The lumber function, though, is how much we want. That's represented by the first variable in the function. So when we come to a custom formula, we need to create what are called, or not create, but use a series of functions that, if fed the right information, gives us the right results. So in this case, a lumber function has 5 requirements. How much you want, and each requirement is separated by a comma. So the first one is how much you want, in this case 1, then the size, thickness, width, and length, and the final one, P-treated, tells us what lumber table to derive the price from. It goes to a pressure-treated lumber table to get the cost. So in this case, we want to modify how much we want. We don't want 1. Instead, we want to take the length of the deck joist edge and divide it by 12. At the end, we don't want to list the length of the edge. We'll list a 12-foot piece. So that takes care of the first condition. And every if requires a corresponding end if, so I'll type that in there. And if I do a cleanup, it does some indentation so I can easily follow it. So I've just established that first condition. So if I bring up my little rules here, anything less than or equal to 6 feet cut from a 12-foot piece of lumber. Length divided by 12 tells me how many 12-foot pieces of lumber I need. For the rest of the conditions, I'm going to quickly do a little trick here. So I quickly created and populated this formula for us. So the first line, it remains the same. There's the length divided by 12 and list me a 12-foot piece of lumber if it's less than or equal to 6. The next condition, which I separated with an else statement, states that if it's between a 6 and 16 foot piece of lumber or equal to 16. So this function right here is important. This corresponds to that second rule, anything between 6 and 16. We have to tag on at the end of it length equals 16 because 16 feet on its own is not between 16 and 6. So what that line does is take a look at any piece of lumber that's between 6 and 16 feet or dead equal to 16 feet. If that is true, then we'll order one piece of lumber at the length of which the deck edge is, which is that, in this case, the fourth requirement of the formula. Next, if I come back up to my rules here, if it's between 6 and 18, I want one 8-foot and one 10-foot. Or, which is in our case, if it's between 18 and 20, I want two 10-footers. Otherwise, if it's greater than 20 feet, take the amount of, and that's wrong, length, just noticed a little mistake there, so take the length of the piece of lumber, divide it by 12, and order me a 12-foot. I'll hit OK, save my changes, and that will then regenerate the report with those conditions. In this case, now I get two 12-footers, and one thing I forgot to change is the unit of measurement, so let me quickly go back and change the unit of measurement from feet now to each. So I get two 12-footers and four 10-footers, exactly what I wanted. So taking a look at my deck layout, I got two 10-footers at the front, two 10-footers against the house, a 12-footer and 12-footer on either side. So I've basically given the rules that I require the program to follow within the formula based on how long each deck edge is. Take a look at composite deck railing as well. So this deck has been defined to have a composite deck board. And right now it's listing in lineal feet, 511 lineal feet. I'd prefer perhaps to specify individual deck boards. So if I bring up my dialog again, showing you the rules I've created for composite decking, it comes in three different lengths, 12, 16, and 20. And I've color coded them here. So yellow is in for 12 feet, green is for 16 feet, and blue obviously for 20. So anything less than or equal to 4 cut from a 12-foot. I want half of a piece of 12-foot if it's between 4 and 6, etc. Anything greater than 40 will just cut from a 20-foot length. What I'm going to do then is do the same thing or a similar thing that we did with the ring joist, except a little difference here is that the composite decking, although it simulates wood, is technically not a piece of lumber. So it's going to be a list format. And further to that, notice the description. It's 5/4 by 6, which is a common way of describing a deck board. The program by default will list 1 1/4 inches as 1 1/4. It doesn't have enough knowledge to rewrite 1 1/4 as 5/4, although that's a typical industry standard to list as a deck board. So in order to get 5/4 to show, we write it as a written description. I'm going to come back to my report, go back to materials. I'll locate composite deck boards. There's two of them here. The one that is the first, notice the description at the far side, gives us 5/4. The other one is calculated. In other words, if I were to edit the first one, The first one is taking note of the size of deck board that was drawn. If you edited your deck boards in your drawing to be 1 1/4 inches, then it knows it's a 5/4 by 6. The second composite deck board formula takes care of other dimensions that you may put in, at which point it reads out whatever dimension you put into the drawing. Well, I'm going to take this one. First of all, I'm going to relabel it 12 feet and then start following the rules that I've established here. So anything less than or equal to 4 feet, cut from a 12 foot, give me half of length if it's between 4 and 6. I'll go down to the 10 to 12 foot, it's 1 board, 2 boards between 20 and 24, and 1 board of 12 foot and 1 board of 16 between 20 and 24, or sorry, 24 and 28. So the rules become a little bit lengthier, but again, we just follow the same logic, a series of cascading if, else, and if statements. If length is less than or equal to 4 feet, we'll take a list and length divided by 12. That tells me how many pieces of 12-foot boards to order. Every new if requires an end if, and I'll do a cleanup to give the indentation. Oh, I should also point out again the description before I forget. Now that I'm ordering this as an actual 12 foot, I should put that in as the description. So there's the overwritten description. That's what is going to be shown in that description column. So that's why we can override the 1 1/4 to be strictly 5/4 of an inch. Within the formula, I can simply go to else to make up the next condition, and we'll write that between statement. So if between, and if you're curious as to what all these functions and variables are, there's a button down here called variables, which brings up this dialog. First and foremost, we can show you all the known variables that are specific to group deck. Again, a variable is a known property of each group. At the bottom are functions, and functions are common no matter what group, but this shows you all the functions that you could use. And again, a function is basically a predetermined mathematical equation that if fed the right information gives you the correct result. And I'm using the between here. If I click on it, it gives you an example of how to use that function. It's the word between followed by a bracket. The first variable there is the value, how much you want, separated by the min and max. So in this case, it will take whatever value we put in there and compare it to the minimum and maximum limits that we put in. So in this case, we're comparing the length, comma, and we want to be between 4 feet and 6 feet. 4 feet. But again, 6 feet is not between 4 and 6, so we're going to type in or length equals 6 feet. If that is true, we'll list, in this case, 0.5, which is half a board. Every if requires a corresponding end if. I'll do a quick cleanup, and that completes that part of it. However, we got other conditions. So again, I'm just going to do a quick trick here. And fill the rest of the formula out quickly for us. Bring up my rules just to compare. So this again only does the yellow, the 12 footers. So the first one, cut from a 12 foot if it's less than or equal to 4, that's that first condition labeled right here. Second condition, if it's between 4 and 6, give me half. If it's between 10 and 12, give me 1. If it's between 20 and 24, give me 2. And if it's between 24 and 28, give me 1. And then we'll create a formula for 16 footers to give me the other 16 footer if it's between 20 and 24. I'll hit OK, save my changes. I'll make a copy of that 12-foot piece of lumber, edit the copy, relabel it appropriately, and quickly paste in a predetermined formula that I've written. And I'll bring up the rules again just so you could follow along. So again, now we're looking at the the green footer, the green labels. So that's a 16-footer. So between 6 feet and 8 feet, which is the first condition, we want half of a piece of composite decking board. If it's between 12 and 16, we want 1, listing here. If it's between 24 and 28, we want 1. 24 and 28, we get 1. If it's between 28 and 32, we get 2. And again, another 1 if it's between 32 and 36. And then we'll create a 20-foot length that will give us 20 footers when needed. Make another copy. I'll edit that copy, label it appropriately. And quickly rewrite that formula, bring up that rules again just so we could follow along. Again, now we're looking at the blue. So anywhere between 8 and 10, we want half of a 20-foot board, which is that first condition. 8 and 10 gives me half a board, etc. Until we get longer than 40, then we're taking note of how many 20-foot boards are required to make up any length greater than 40 feet. So with that done, I can hit OK, save my changes, hit OK again. I have 2 new materials. They're not added, which is why I'm getting a error down here. So I'll double click on the report error to add both the 16 and 20 foot to the layout. The 12 is already there because that was the original one that I just relabeled. So there's the original 12 foot. I can add more than one at a time by using the control key to select more than one material and drag them both into the same location. They'll list under the original 12-foot lengths. Hit OK, and now the program is going to take note of how the deck was drawn based on those rules to give me how many boards or individual boards. And again, I made the mistake of forgetting to change my units. It's still listed in feet. That should be each. Save my changes. And it gives me the right quantity. So if I wanted to test that, for example, I could edit this and let's say that is now 14 feet left to right. I should be listing now a series of 16-foot boards, and I am. Although, again, the units of measurement I forgot to change. We can quickly do that. But again, although the material setup or this custom formula may on the surface look complicated, it's following basically a very simple rule. Take note of the length of lumber drawn, or in this case, the length of the deck board, and based on how long it is, logically break it down into what you want to order. Okay. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's Friday Fundamental. There was kind of a lot put in there towards the end. I went from something that's quite simple to something that's quite complex, but I hope that you understand the power of SoftList. We can get it to be very specific as to how things are going to be ordered. As mentioned, the summary is going to be posted on our social media page sometime over the next few days, so you can review it at that time. And I thank you again for joining me today, and have a great weekend, everyone. Thank you.